Hello and welcome back to the channel today. In today's video I'm going to show you how I process one of my woodland images in Lightroom and in Photoshop, and I'm going to be using a technique called the ORTON Effect. And so what I'll do is I'll get the screen up ready for the image up ready to be processed, and we'll continue from there. What I'm going to do, obviously, with today's video is I'm going to take one of my woodland images that I took a couple of weeks ago in one of my videos, and I'm going to show you how I processed it, taking it from Lightroom into Photoshop and applying a part of a technique called the ORTON Effect. Now, obviously, the ORTON Effect has been around for quite a number of years now, and it's very controversial in the photography area. Some people hate it, some people love it, but I think if it's an effect that it really works in woodland, and also if it's done correctly, it's a bit like HDR. If it's done correctly, I think it does provide a little bit of a great effect, especially on woodland images. But it's one of those effects that if you overdo it, it can look very unnatural. It can look very not a very nice effect. Essentially, what you would have with the old HDR images of years ago, where people would pump the HDR effect up to the maximum, and it did look very unrealistic and very horrible. But I think if done correctly, it can be a great effect. So this is the image that I took a couple of weeks ago in my video. I'll put a link up here now for you to go and watch that video if you want to go and watch it and see how I took it. And I was quite surprised with this image, because literally I was looking another way at a shot that I'd captured a couple of times before of a winding path in the local woodland near where I live. And I literally turned around and this light was being casted on this tree in such a fantastic way. And it was a good composition in the fact that there was a lot of dense bush and trees behind the tree in question. So it sort of blocked out a lot of the sky and a lot of the background, and made a very nice background. And also the light was casting through the trees. It's quite thick and quite dense woodland where this tree is at the moment, because a lot of the leaves are still on the trees. They're probably gone now because we've had a bit of frost over the last few days, so I can imagine a lot of the leaves have dropped off now and autumn started to develop into winter, into the woodland. But I was greeted with some really nice light shining on the trees, and it really lit up this tree and it looked great. And literally I just turned around and saw this and I thought, wow, that looks brilliant. So this is the image I took, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a little bit of pre-processing in Lightroom at the moment. So as you can see here, the white balance of the camera decided a white balance, and I think it chose it to be very cool, because I think because it's a lot of greens and oranges in the frame, I think if you would have made it quite warm, I think it would have made the images, the image quite unrealistic. So for example, if I would have chose a cloudy white balance, as you can see, it's probably far too orange, it's far too intense of a colour, and the daylight is probably natural, but I think that's a bit too strong as well. So I think it shows a very cool white balance around about 3600 Kelvin, which I think is perfect for this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to boost the tint slightly, because I wanted a more saturated colour. I feel as though the exposure was a little bit too high, so I'm just going to pull the exposure back to make it more moody and more like a darker, more moody image. And I'm going to push the contrast up, because I do love loads of contrast in my my woodland images. I'm going to bump the highlights up, maybe reduce the shadows a little, up the whites and reduce the blacks a little bit. And as you can see, doing that actually masks some of the outside leaves and provides a bit more of a a contrast onto the tree in front of us. So I'm going to bump up a bit of texture because I feel as though I love a bit of texture in my images, and I'm going to put a little bit of DAs on it and pull back the clarity slightly. One thing I wanted to do on this image as well is I'm going to bump up the saturation quite a bit because it will bring out the oranges and greens and the colours, and a little touch of vibrance. So what I'll do is I'm going to move down to the colour sliders, and I'm going to put a bit more orange into it and a bit more green, because I think obviously the predominant colours are orange and green, and a little bit of red as well. And as you can probably see, it does add a little bit of difference in colour. It's only very slight, but you can see a little bit of difference in it. Okay, so obviously that's the image that I'm going to that I've made the adjustments in Lightroom that I'm quite happy with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Photoshop. So I'm going to go to Edit and Edit in Adobe Photoshop. Yeah, so that's the image uploaded into Photoshop now and waiting to be edited. So what I normally do with the ORTON Effect is I normally duplicate the normal image, the background image. So I'm just going to duplicate that, and we work on the duplicated image. So firstly I'm going to go up to blur and Gaussian blur, and you apply a blur to the image. Now what I normally do is that as a real fun for the blur, I normally use the pixel count of my Olympus camera, when basically the camera that the photo was taken with. So in the case of this image, it's a 24 megapixel. Yeah, so it's a 24 megapixel camera. So I usually normally use around about 24 pixels. So I'll click OK, and as you can see, it's quite blurred and it doesn't look very good at the moment. So next step is to click Adjustment and Levels. And then what you normally do with the levels is that we normally pull the white slider right across as far as I can to get to a point where you like the image. So it's very much a rule of thumb, and based on your judgment. And then what I normally do is I would pull the middle slider, which is the grey slider, across a little bit till I get an image that looks something that I would like. Now obviously it looks awful at the moment because by doing this effect it looks quite strong. So then what I do is I will go over to the layers panel and I will reduce the opacity of the image down to 0. And then what I will do is I will slowly bump up the image to where I want it. So for example, at the moment it's around about 20%. So I mean you can bump it up, but so for example, if you go up to 40 or 50, you're going to get that very reminds me of the 1930s movies look, where it's very soft and very ethereal, but I think that's a little bit too much for my liking. So I normally work around about maybe 15 to 20% image, 15 to 20% opacity. So I'm going to try 15, and I think that's okay, but I think you might try. I work at like 20%, so I think that really works at 20%, and it's creating quite a soft, ethereal look to that image. So, and that's exactly what I want for that image, and also what it's doing is it's creating it's actually taking away a lot of the messiness of the outside area, and it's really focusing on the tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save that now, and it will save as a PSD file for Photoshop. Okay, that's saved. So one of the things I love about the way Photoshop and Lightroom works is that image will pop back into Lightroom. So you'll see here, I'll go back into Lightroom and there's the image finished. Yeah, so that's the image back into Lightroom, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply a filter just as a bit of a vignette. So I'm just going to apply the radial filter and just apply it in a position that I like. So I'll do that. I'm just going to drag it over and center it, and then I'm just going to bump the exposure down maybe a couple of steps, and just position it about a bit. Maybe I'll bump it a little bit lower, I think. Yeah, so so that's the image finished, and that's the overall quick 5-minute tip of using the ORTON effect to create a bit of depth and a bit of atmosphere in a woodland image. And obviously it's a very quick tutorial for the basis of this video. You can play about with how you adjust the sliders and things like that, and also obviously every image is going to be slightly different in the way it works and the amount of effect that you have to use. But obviously this video will give you a good basis on what techniques you use and what how to actually create the ORTON effect. I hope you enjoyed that video and you found these tips useful. If there's anything that you think that could be done differently, or is there a slightly different way that you do it, then please leave a comment below and we'll have a chat and a discussion about it. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you're not already subscribed, then please do so. And hopefully I'll see you again next week.